Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue on with our theme exploring spoken word, looking at an artist who has consistently given me a tough time with their music. We're going to be looking at Aesop Rock, something off their Labor Days album, looking at No Regrets, stylized with a capital E in regrets, but a lowercase r. The first E is capital, the second one's not. Let's dive into it. I'm expecting some rap in here, but spoken word. Well, actually, no. We did listen to Field Guide, Spirit World Field Guide, and I think the first track on that had spoken word in it too. So I guess it isn't completely unusual for his style. Let's dig into it. See what's going on. No regrets.
Yo, ask her. Hey, Lucy, come here. Guys, cut it out. Lucy, she didn't hear you. Yo, ask her again. How old are you? Let her alone, me. Lucy, come here. Lucy, she ain't listening to you. Yo, ask her again. Hey, Lucy, how old are you? Lucy. Nah, she's not listening. Lucy was 7 and wore a head of blue barrettes. City born into this world with no knowledge and no regrets. Had a piece of yellow chalk with which she drew up on the street the many faces of the various locals that she would meet. There was Joshua, age 10, bully up the block who always took her milk money at the morning bus stop. There was Mrs. Crabtree and her poodle. She always gave a wave and holler on her weekly trip down to the bingo parlor. And she drew men, women, kids, sunsets, clouds. And she drew skyscrapers, fruit stands, cities, towns. Always said hello to passers-by. They asked her why she passed the time attaching lines of concrete, but she would only smile. Now all the other children
It's
living
very
in or near her
dense.
building ran around like tyrants soaking up the open fire hydrants. They would say, hey, little Lucy, wanna come jump double dutch? Lucy would pause, look, grin and say, I'm busy, thank you much. Well, 1 year passed and believe it or not, she covered every last inch of the entire sidewalk and she stopped. After all this, you're just giving in today? She said, I'm not giving in, I'm finished. And walked away. 1, 2, 3, that's the speed of the C. A, B, C, that's the speed of the D. You could dream a little dream or you could live a little dream. I'd rather live it. The dream is always chase but never get it. 1, 2, 3, that's the speed of the C. A, B, C, that's the speed of the D.
It's an interesting production too. I think I'm used to his later works, where there's a crisper production to it.
In her blue barrettes for long locks, held up with a clip, traded in her yellow chalk for charcoal sticks. She drew little Bobby who would come to sweep the board. And she drew the mailman delivered every day at 4. Lucy had very little contact with the folks outside her cubicle day, but found it suitable and she liked it that way. She had a man now, Rico, similar, Herman. They would only see each other once or twice a week on purpose. They appreciated space and Rico was an artist too, so they'd connect on Saturdays to share the pictures that they drew. Now every month or so she'd get a knock up on the front door, just one of the neighbors.
We got the vocalization this time.
Girl really said, Lucy, wanna join me for some lunch? Lucy would smile and say, I'm busy, thank you much. The neighbor'd make a weird
I
face
think the
the second
vocals
the
are
door
singing
shut.
the
They
same
wanna tell her
thing
friends how truly crazy Lucy
that
was.
was
Lucy
played
knew what people
on
thought, but didn't care, 'cause while they spread
a
their rumors through the
reeded
streets,
instrument,
she
a
did
double
another
reeded
masterpiece.
instrument last time.
That's the speed of the C. A, B, C, that's the speed of the D. You could dream a little dream or you could live a little dream. I'd rather live it. Dreamers always chase but never get it. 1, 2, 3, that's the speed of the C. A, B, C, that's the speed
Little
of the D.
snare accent change there.
Dreamer, you could live a little dream. I'd rather live it. Dreamers always chase but never get it. Lucy was 87 upon a deathbed at the senior home where she had previously checked in. Traded in the locks and clip for a headrest. Traded in the charcoal sticks for arthritis. It had to happen. She drew no more. Just sat and watched the dawn. Had a television in the room that she never turned on. Lucy pinned up a life's worth of pictures on the wall and sat and smiled and looked each one over just to laugh at it all. Rico, he had passed about 5 years back, so the visiting hours pulled in a big flock of nothing. She never spoken much throughout the spanning of her life until the day she leaned forward, grinned and pulled the nurse aside and she said, look, I've never had a dream in my life because a dream is what you want to do but still haven't pursued. I knew what I wanted and did it till it was done, so I've been the dream that I wanted to be since day one. Well, the nurse jumped back. She never heard Lucy even talk, especially words like that. She walked over to the door and pulled it closed behind. Then Lucy blew a kiss to each one of her pictures and she died. 1, 2, 3, that's the speed of the C. A, B, C, that's the speed of the D. You can dream a little dream or you can live a little dream. I'd rather live it, 'cause dreamers always chase but never get it. 1, 2, 3, that's the speed of the C. A, B, C, that's the speed of the D. You can dream a little dream or you can live a little dream. I'd rather live it, 'cause dreamers always chase but never get it. 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. 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 Like that. Lock that. Like that. Like that. Like this. Like this.
Oh, it wasn't a double reed. It was a bowed instrument. I tell you, there's a lot of stuff going on there, and a compressed, crunchy production. It was tough to hear with everything, but in modest isolation there, definitely tell it was a bowed instrument. All right. So, musically, we got a beat that goes on throughout pretty much the entire track. There are a couple of, they feel like hiccups, but it's going to be little beat switch ups. We heard it in the third verse, I think it was one of them where the snare went to quarter note accents, accenting beat 3, 4, and then 1 on the next bar, lining up with what the vocals are doing. It's a really cool idea. And we hear this in a couple of places. It doesn't happen often, but we will get a couple of extra snare hits in order to accentuate a specific rhythm that tends to be reflected in the vocals as well. Other than that, though, the drum beat doesn't change very much at all. The foundational atmospheric aspects don't change at all. We do have our bowed instrument at the beginning. I think it's a cello, but I might be a little off on that. Definitely not. I don't think it's a violin, though. Definitely not a contrabass. But we have that instrument in our first verse, and it's replaced by the ethereal female vocals in our second and third verse. It's really the only thing that changes throughout this track as far as the composition itself. It's interesting though because the string instrument kind of has a little bit of animosity to it. I think it's because it's more of a full-bodied sound. There's a little bit of extra pressure on it. You can hear the bow scraping across the strings. But then it's replaced by, which I think is still playing the same line, the ethereal vocals that sit in the background, which are less full-bodied. They're less grounded. They're transparent. They're ethereal. They're airy. Very different from what I think is the cello. It's an interesting decision to do that. I don't know if there's something in the song that pushes towards that direction. And then even odder is that we don't get a third variation on this concept for our third verse. We just bring back those vocals. I don't know how to interpret most of it. Atmospherically, I'd say the song is a bit darker, but there's something fun to it. It might be the little plump plump little string finger picks that we're getting in places, little ornamental idea, bum chicka bum 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 chicka bum bum. That little idea that kind of gives it some bounciness. It could be some of the flow in his melodic rapping. We'll get to the vocal stuff in a second. But I'd say harmonically, the emotion I feel in the chords and what's played on top of them is darker. I don't want to say it's sad or aggressive. It's just, it's not bright. It's not happy. It's a little less than neutral, dark neutral, I guess we can call it. Um, so it's interesting to kind of hear this less than positive vibe on this track. And the other thing I want to touch on before we hit vocals and then lyrics, the two big aspects of this, is the overall production on it. I saw in the middle of the track, it's a 2001 album. The production feels 2001. It is crunchy, it's compressed, it's It's a far cry from his latest works, and it's definitely a product of its time. I'm wondering if Aesop would leave it as it is if he decided to remaster it, or if he would clean up the production to modern standards. I'm not a big fan of it at all. It especially the first verse is very cluttered once we bring in the last couple of layers, and it's not even like it's super dense. It just ends up feeling super dense. And I even called the track dense at one time. But there's only ever like two vocals, a sparse drum kit, the plucked strings, the melody that sits on top of everything, and like a chord progression. Like it's not a lot of things, but it feels so big in the first verse, particularly for some reason. Maybe it's because the string is replaced by the ethereal vocals, which feel like they take up less space. That first verse is just, it feels large, and it really isn't. And I think if he were to recreate this today, it would end up being a bit more spacious, and he'd have to put in some extra instruments in order to fill in some of the holes that are left, or just leave it with a bit more spacious. Actually, when I think of Spirit World Field Guide, I remember quite a few spacious sections to that album, so that's probably the direction he would go. But yeah, the mid-fi overall sound of this just does not work for me. I don't think that the instrument tones, the way that they're mixed, and the overall feel are very complementary to a good listen of it. It creates a specific vibe for sure. As usual, I'm not going to say that it's wrong. It just doesn't work for me. Now, to follow up with that 2001 comment release date, the vocals feel very 90s. Does anybody else get that? I'm not going to say that I listen to a lot of hip hop or rap um, in the 90s, in the 2000s. I mean, as y'all know, I'm still relatively fresh to the genre and vocal delivery as a whole today in 2024. So I certainly didn't listen to much in my past. But there is a vocalist. Sorry, maybe. Can we just say vocalist? There's a rapper who this style reminds me of. Will Smith. Y'all remember Millennium? Right? You tell me that this vocal technique doesn't remind you of that. There is a melodic element to it. He'll pick a note and then he'll choose to go up some and come back down. It has a nice pitched flow to it. The rhythmic flow, I think, is rather consistent. I'll touch on that in a second. But as far as melody, as far as pitches go, there is this idea to choose a note and then make something melodic out of it, whether it's dipping down into your sentence or coming up and coming down. There's movement to a lot of it. It's very different from the rap of the last 5 to 10 years, which is outside of the more technical realms, kind of pushed towards a simplicity. I mean, it's where the entire mumble rap kind of thing came from, I think. There just isn't a lot of dynamic elements in the rapping technique that I hear in the more mainstream styles of hip hop that I think allows this to stand out as something that feels older. It was one of the first things that stood out to me. The other thing that stands out to me as a production thing is that there are three, four, I'm going to go with four different vocals here as far as the rapping goes. We have two that are centered, and I'm going to say that they're always layered. I don't think I ever heard any differentiation between them, but it's a more full-bodied sound than either of the vocals that are pushed out to the side, which sound smaller. And that's usually achieved by doubling up, having them record the track a second time, and then having them play identically. So in effect, we have three voices, but I think there's actually four recorded here. And it allows the vocals to jump around. The choruses are pushed out to the side. We get one on either side. The verses jump around. We have the center. Sometimes we have both sides simultaneously. Sometimes they take turns. And so the vocals jump around. And I picked up only a handful of sentences here, but it seemed that whenever it changed, we had a shift in perspective. Somebody else was saying something. The narrator was always center, and then other, he said this, and then the other, a voice over here would pop in and say the line and come back to the narrator in the middle, stuff like that. I like the idea, right? Because assuming I'm right and that it's about different characters, one of the things that I always talk about in concept albums, especially in rock and metal, is that if you're going to have different characters, I prefer them to have different voices. If you tell a story with multiple characters, multiple viewpoints, but you use the same vocal technique for all of them, I'm going to get lost. I'm going to be less connected with it. Here we have one vocal delivery for everyone, but the placement still allows a separation between characters. I like that. We'll get into the lyrics in a second and we'll see how effective I find it to be, but at least just the general concept of letting me know, hey, someone else is saying something now, this is not the narrator's thoughts, or this is not some other character's thoughts, is enough to already get me engaged with it a little bit. I wonder how consistent that is, though. Like I said, I picked that up around the first verse. I don't know if this was something that appeared throughout all of it. Maybe verses 2 and 3 didn't have shifting perspective, and yet we still had the bouncing around. I don't know. We'll get there eventually. Actually, we won't. I'd have to replay the song with the... I might do that. It's short enough. When I read the lyrics, I might do it with the music. See how that works. Um... Oh, yeah, and then rhythmic, right? So we already talked melodic, we've talked production, rhythmic flow of the vocals. I don't know how early in Aesop's career this is. I know he's still making music now. This is at least 2 decades this is 2 decades prior to uh, Spirit World Field Guide. I don't know if that's his latest, but still, he's been in the game for 20 years. At least. This feels like somebody who still has room to grow. There were some interesting syllabic ideas in here, but on the rhythmic side of things, it's just sort of stagnant. It's the same rhythm throughout a lot of it. It's kind of missing the thing that I tend to get drawn to when it comes to rap, which is rhythmic diversity. It's the same thing if I'm listening to a riff that's just 16th notes all the time. Looking at you, black metal. I'm gonna get bored. I need that dynamic rhythmic quality. It's why those moments of the snare changing up its accent pattern for just a couple of beats stand out to me. It's a dynamic quality that allows the song to be something more than what it is. And unfortunately, this song, the more that I think about it now, is rather stagnant on a lot of variables. And I think that's why, for the most part, it's going to bounce off of me. It has a nice vibe, it just doesn't go anywhere with it for the most part. I'm curious if Aesop maybe has more rhythmic variety on other tracks, but because of the bouncing channels for the vocals, he wanted to keep a rigidity to that since there's already another dynamic quality. But I think the end result for me is it doesn't quite work though. But it might just be something that lines up in this similar vein as the production where it's just dated. Not necessarily that it's bad because it's older, but that I have modern ears that appreciate something different than what was happening then. Again, subjective. It's not a wrong way to do it, it's not a bad way to do it. It just didn't work for me, at least on a first listen. I'm going to check out some lyrics, see what's going on there, see what we can figure out here. Alright, so the panning of the vocals, having them in different sides of the speakers, it does line up with most of the times that a perspective changes when there's somebody who says something specific, such as in the opening verse, when the kids come by and say, "Hey, Lucy, would you like to come jump double dutch?" But there really aren't that many places where the perspective changes away from the narrator. And so most of it is done for the artistic reason of having some sort of diversity to the track. So I appreciate that, because they could have easily left it to just the 3 or 4 times that it happens, and it would have ended up much like the strings becoming the vocals from verse 1 to 2, a nice touch that just isn't utilized very often, or more particularly, the rhythmic shift up in the snare. Now, the track is about Lucy, who lived her life with no regrets, as the title of the track is. Verse 1 looks at her at age of 7. She's kept to herself, rather introverted, and she sidewalk chalk draws on the sidewalk. She uses chalk to draw on the sidewalk every day for at least a year. She has a routine and she enjoys it. Kids ask her to come do stuff with her and she's like, "No, that's good. I'm fine how I am." And at the end, she covers the entire sidewalk and someone says, "Wow, you're just going to give in today?" And she says, "I'm not giving in. I'm done. I've accomplished this." Verse 2 looks at Lucy at the age of 37, still in the same apartment that she grew up in. Well, she's in the same building she grew up in. She has her own apartment now. And she's traded her chalk in for charcoal sticks and she still draws. She does have a job, a cubicle job, but outside of that, she doesn't interact with people very often. But she does find a man named Rico who is similar. He also draws and is also a hermit. They see each other once a week, primarily to share some pictures, but we'll see later on in verse 3 that there probably is something more to this relationship. Regardless, she gets knocks on her doors. Neighbor comes by and says, "Hey, you want to go get some lunch?" And she goes, "Nah, I'm good." And so they call her crazy, and she knows this. She hears the rumors, but instead of caring, she draws some more masterpieces. Verse 3 skips us to 87, age 87, that is. She's checked herself into a senior home and has arthritis, so she draws no more. Rico passed 5 years back, so nobody really visits her during visiting hours. She has a television that she never turns on. And an interesting line says she'd never spoken once throughout the span of her life until the day she leaned forward, grinned, and pulled the nurse aside and said, "Look, I've never had a dream in my life, because a dream is what you want to do but still haven't pursued. I knew what I wanted and I did it till it was done, so I've been the dream that I wanted to be since day one." Says the nurse jumped back after this. She'd never heard Lucy talk. Closed the door. Lucy blew some kisses to each of her pictures that she had hung up, and then she died. It's rather straightforward on the surface, though thanks to some annotators, it is possible to see this as a metaphor for Aesop himself. Feels like a person who doesn't quite do what's expected of him as an artist, maybe possibly as a hip-hop artist. He does things his own ways. I know he is this massive wordsmith, and I very rarely know what he's ever talking about. So maybe that was something that was thrown around even in the 2000s, earlier in his career, still having obscure lyrics, and maybe people just kind of wrote him off as this little oddity in the hip hop world. But he did his own thing. He had a dream, he kept pursuing it. And Maybe because people had difficulty understanding his lyrics, the general consensus was that he never spoken. So here, speaking through Lucy, he says, I've never had a dream in my life. I've always pursued what I wanted. Dreams are hypotheticals. This was my life. I'm doing it. That kind of vibe. Speaking through the song as himself. All this leads into the chorus, which we do get between the verses, which says 1, 2, 3, that's the speed of the seed. ABC, that's the speed of the need. You can dream a little dream or you can live a little dream. I'd rather live it because dreamers always chase but never get it. What I get from this is, the two final lines I think make perfect sense. You can either dream your dreams or live them. Well, I don't want to dream them. I want to live them. So that's what I'm going to do. If you dream, you just never get it. And that's fairly straightforward. But then the other two, I think, comes down to the simplicity of it all. Our outro was a bouncing back and forth. 1, 2, 3, ABC. 1, 2, 3, ABC. The final lines are like that. Yeah, like that. I think it's supposed to be that it's as easy as alphabets and counting. It's not particularly difficult to understand why Aesop does what he does, why Lucy did what she did. People just refuse to see the simplicity of it, of somebody who just wanted to do their own thing. Maybe it's about the simplicity of achieving your dreams. I think that might be a little bit more misplaced, but I think he's not wrong in that if you want to achieve your dreams, you need to do them in some capacity. If you end up failing or don't have the resources for it, that's one thing. But if you've never taken the first step to even start achieving them, then that's on you for keeping it a hypothetical your whole life. It really is simple to take that first step. I don't know, but I do think that the idea of bringing in the 1, 2, 3 ABC, of starting off with a 7-year-old kid just painting on a sidewalk, is about the simplicity of it all. I will say, on a purely poetic side, this didn't quite stand out to me. I don't know if this was perfectly done or purposefully dumbed down in order to make it easily understood on the surface, so that this would be Aesop's way of saying, hey, look, just because you don't get me doesn't mean that I'm not doing what I want to do, right? Maybe the rest of the album is just as dense as I'm used to with his lyrical writing, with his wordsmithing, but this is very much on the surface. There is a few areas that I'm like, oh, that's some clever wordplay, or I really like the way that, the rhyme scheme works here. But on the whole, it feels less than, which again makes sense. This is 20 years prior to his masterpiece. The most dense lyrical thing I've ever read. So it makes sense that it would be a little easier to read, but it also, I don't know, it's missing some of the stuff that I enjoy about the poetry that goes into some of the best rapped lyrics. There's a couple of nice parts in it, but on the whole, I don't know, it's just very straightforward. I don't even have a section where I'm like, dang, I need to bring this line up and look at like the flow of it or anything. Like, it tells a story. It's well done. Nothing really stands out though. I think that, it's like any artist though. They're going to get better over time. 20 years is a long time to improve on. So those are my thoughts. Aesop rocks, no regrets. I'm always fearful going into an Aesop reaction because I'm like, the music's going to be a bit, a bit simple for me, and then the lyrics are going to go completely over my head. It's going to be a bad analysis. And then this one ended up pretty good, I think, which just tells me that, it's an odd track for Aesop. Anyways, what are your thoughts, comments, perspectives, opinions? Toss all that stuff down there in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you, come on, Come on, you can do it. There you go. Stop being so shy. It takes you to this menu right here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.